Hello and welcome back to the MXP San Francisco Modern 20K Headliner. I am Niall Joan Rivers. I am joined in the booth today by Jerry Thompson. Jerry, how are you doing?
I'm ready. Let's go.
I I am also ready. Let's get into it. We are in round 13, I believe here, looking at a Temur Breach versus Amulet Titan match. Now, what are your initial thoughts on these decks going up against each other?
Oh, final round of Swiss, so this is pretty exciting. Uh, I would say that in general, I like Amulet's side in matchups like this. The Breach deck is mostly a combo deck, but this is one of the versions of Breach that doesn't have like a Thassa's Oracle kill, they don't have a Grape Shot kill, and are even doing things like playing basic Mountain because they're not playing the card counter spell. So they don't even have a ton of interaction either. It is just some small creatures, Underworld Breach for value, which I like in general, but in matchups like Amulet, it's very tough. But Dan actually has 2 copies of Blood Moon main deck.
Yeah, I've been taking a look at those two Blood Moons main deck. That seems very, very nice for this right here. Looks like we are on turn 2 with Dan here. Got his Ragavan down. Turn 1. Of course, going to be difficult to attack that into the Grazer, but we'll see what he's got up his sleeve.
Maybe Grazer gets to live for a few turns this time around.
Maybe. Nope.
Oh,
No such luck.
nope. Its job is to always die for one
Yep.
reason or another.
It's done its job. It's run its course. Thank you, Grazer, for your service. Yeah, it's just going to be a land off the Ragavan trigger. Back over to Patrick.
Yeah, the Ragavan is pretty nice in decks like this because you have Underworld Breach, so building up that stash of treasures is really nice and allows you to fire off like that many more lightning bolts a little bit earlier. You can potentially kill people as early as turn 4, maybe turn 3 if you had like a lot of Dragon's Rage channelers, but it doesn't seem like Dan does quite yet.
Yeah, and it looks like just going to be a Dryad into a Vesuva for Patrick. Looking for something to write down the land that he has copied.
I think you pointed at the Stomping Ground,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of interesting that the Ragavan hit. Uh, I guess is that a bounce land? Maybe it's a Lush Portico. I don't know. But either way, it seems like Patrick had a couple good opportunities to deploy a bounce land if he had it,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe that's the missing piece currently.
Possibly. Back over to Dan. We're going to see what he's doing here. It's going to be a Ledger Shredder to start things off, and then an Unholy Heat on the Dryad.
So it does not have Delirium quite yet, but the Ledger Shredder gets him there.
Hmm. Yep, exactly. Delirium. Dryad goes away. Ragavan gets to get in again. Hits another land.
That is the bounce land. I know that already. Yeah, worth noting, Dan had to use the treasure to cast that Unholy Heat.
Yeah.
Did get to draw a card off the Ledger Shredder, but potentially missing a land drop here.
Looks like he is going to make the land drop. It's going to be a Spire Bluff. Going to use it and the treasure to cast an Expressive Iteration. I'm seeing a Breach and maybe a couple lands. Yep.
Pretty interesting to play iteration after you've already made your land drop, also busting a treasure to do it. But that indicates to me that Dan is maybe looking for something a little specific or just has a decent amount of things like expressive iteration in his hand already. But this deck could also just hit a Mishra's Bauble and still get the 2-for-1 off of iteration. So you still have kind of like the backdoor out to have it not feel so bad.
Absolutely. And on Patrick's turn, we're going to see the Fun of One of Expedition map in his deck get played. And looks like that's going to get cracked immediately.
So this could be the Karoo if Patrick feels like he needs it, but there's no amulet in sight, no
Mhm.
Urza Saga that will give him an amulet at some point, and he's just getting close to 6 mana anyway, so might transition into a different sort of game plan here.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be Valakut.
One of the Dryads is dead already, but it's not that hard for this deck to find one if he needs it or if he wants it. And yeah, it just looks like Patrick is settling in for a slower game.
Yeah, not that hard at all. Back over to Dan here. Tapping a couple lands for another expressive iteration.
Not too surprising considering how willing he was to just kind of burn the one last turn.
Yeah, looks like Unholy Heat bobbled DRC off that EI.
So pretty tempting to just get the DRC and the bobble, get a little filtering going, especially with the breach that he picked up last turn. But with the Valakut there, you may want the Unholy Heat to kill a potential Dryad. Patrick's also going to have potentially 6 mana next turn. Maybe you just need to kill the Primeval Titan outright. So
Yeah, looks like he did go for the DRC and the Unholy Heat, and is going to cast the DRC, get the trigger off the Ledger Shredder, discard a Breach, put a counter on the Shredder, and swing in with both creatures.
I would imagine that means that Dan already has a backup breach at the ready.
Ragavan's going to hit a One Ring. Dan's going to play a land for turn. We're going to go back over to Patrick.
And if Dan still does have a breach, graveyard now pretty full, DRC on the battlefield, decent amount of mana in play. Could have a pretty explosive turn here.
Yeah, definitely. Still has the Unholy Heat in hand. Seems to be in a pretty good position, but we know the Amulet deck can really turn things around on a dime. So we'll see what Patrick's got.
I think if Patrick drew an Amulet and had all those Mycosynth Gardens that could copy it, he could also have a pretty explosive turn, but given the fact that there does not seem to be an Amulet, and Patrick might just have to play Titan for 6 mana, I don't think that is going to get him out of it. I think he needed to do something a little bit more powerful this game.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. He's in a difficult spot.
I like that Patrick's looking at the graveyard because he saw Dan discard the breach, which I do think indicates that he has another breach. So Patrick's just like, all right, what is going to happen to me next turn? How bad is it going to be?
Yeah, it's definitely considering what Dan could have, based on what he's discarding when. Seems like a pretty important turn for Patrick.
Yeah, for sure. This seems like make or break, and it looks like the options are just hard cast Primeval Titan, get a little bit of value, hope to survive through the turn, or could potentially Summoner's Pact up a Dryad to go with that Valakut and maybe get a little something going there. Like, he does have a bounce land, I believe, so that could potentially pick up the Vesuva, replay that off the second land drop from the Dryad, and copy the Valakut. So if all of that worked out, maybe he could give himself some breathing room.
Yeah, and I believe the life totals on screen are not quite up to date. Looks like based on Patrick's board that we can kind of see there, he might be at 11 life currently, so definitely close. Looks like he is pacting out a Dryad. It's going to trigger Ledger Shredder. I did spot a breach in Dan's hand there for a second, I believe.
I am shocked.
And Dan is going to go ahead and fetch.
I like this. So this is presumably with the Dryad still on the stack,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just nice and clean so that now he knows that he has the red mana open to cast the Unholy Heat, and there's no shenanigans of like he goes to fetch and then Patrick does something in response.
Yeah, very, very tight technical play here. And going to cast the Unholy Heat on the Dryad, which is going to trigger DRC, gonna bin a Ragavan, and Patrick is just going to scoop to that.
Yeah,
Congratulations, Dan, on a very, very clean game one.
yeah, that was with the Valakut trigger on the stack. Valakut's going to check on resolution. So by
Mm-hmm.
killing the Dryad when he did, it meant that his creatures were going to stick around, and that just defeated the whole purpose of what Patrick was trying to do there. Without the Dryad, he couldn't really do anything else that turn, and saw the writing on the wall.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, very, very good game one. Now, looking at the sideboards here, Jerry, any thoughts on what uh, Patrick might be bringing in for this game two that we're about to jump into?
I need to go to the Amulet school. I think we talked about this a little bit yesterday. It's like there's like the Spelunkings. It's still questionable as to what those are for when they come in, and various other assorted cards. Like the Generous Ends, I feel like is an anti Blood Moon kind of thing. Allows you to like Summoner's Pact up a way to get a basic forest, and I think Blood Moon is a the easiest way for these Izzet decks to interact with Amulet. So I would expect that to come in. Maybe that'll get kind of fancy. And then Patrick has a Bajuka Bog and Endurance to fight the Graveyard, and he did see the Underworld Breach there and was very cognizant of that. So those cards are going to be quite strong too. But probably the Pick Your Poisons. I kind of like the Dismembers too. Ragavan is one of the more threatening cards, and as long as you just buy yourself enough time, I think your Amulet stuff is going to be able to take over.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm taking a look at Dan's list now and seeing if there's anything in the sideboard here. I mean, see the Magus of the Moon. Um,
Yeah, third Blood Moon effect. 4 copies of Pick Your Poison. Also,
mhm.
Stern Scolding is okay, not great. Dress Down plus Unholy Heat is kind of like the wombo combo to stop Primeval Titan from triggering and then allowing you to also cleanly remove it. So I do like the Dress Downs in this matchup as well.
Yeah, looks like he's got a lot of options to bring in here.
And it's good because you have some cards that are not all that great. Lightning Bolt is not the best. It did certainly clear out that Grazer in game one, and
Mhm.
that mattered a lot because Dan needed the mana off of the Ragavan treasures. But it's still not a card that you want to just draw against Amulet, especially in multiples. So I think those can pretty safely come out. And then what I was generally doing in these matchups was just kind of shaving on some of the clunkier cards. Just things like Ledger Shredder, for example, is a thing that could potentially
Mm.
come out. And then if Dan were expecting a decent amount of graveyard hate, could also just move away from that a little bit. Maybe shave a copy of Underworld Breach or two.
Yeah, seems very flexible. Seems like he's got a lot of choices. Looks like he did keep some lightning bolts in the deck, as we saw it in his hand, but straight to the bottom, resolving this mulligan to 6. Looks like both players took a mulligan to 6. Also looks like Patrick brought in Radiant Fountain from the
Yeah,
board.
I think that's reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I guess it's worth noting that if you are going to stick with some amount of the breach stuff, like maybe you want to keep in one lightning bolt just so that you
Mm.
have the option to potentially play that a bunch of times to actually kill your opponent. But you did see that it was the card that he put on the bottom. You know, it's
Right, yeah.
definitely the card that he's not excited to have.
Yeah. Preordained from Dan on turn 1, gonna be 1 top, 1 bottom. Back over to Patrick, who draws a map for Dan.
number 3 and sealed
And we're gonna
ODECQ
see
number 4
Valakut as
your pairings
the
have been
land.
posted to Melee.
Some of these games
Those
that
names
Amulet
are
plays, it's just like,
located in
what
green
are
and
you doing? You have
just the
a
areas
land
marked
that gave you
as
2
sealed.
life, an expedition map on turn 2, a Valakut. but it eventually translates into something very powerful.
Yeah, very fun game. Screenshot this, send it to a new player, and say, guess the green deck.
Yep.
The answer might shock you. We're going to see a DRC followed by a Pick Your Poison, which is going to trigger the DRC, put a breach in the yard.
Yeah, graveyard not very filled yet, so that doesn't necessarily mean that Dan already has a breach. And pick your poison against the expedition map. Definitely not the reason why you would bring that card in necessarily, but seeing sort of the awkwardness of Patrick's hand, maybe you just wanted to go after it and ensure that Patrick didn't have access to any particular land that he wanted, or even just like trying to find a basic forest if Dan were on the Blood Moon plan.
Yeah, and I believe we have 3 spell types in the yard right now, so not quite delirious, but could certainly get there pretty easily. There's going to be a Ledger Shredder coming down for Dan, followed by a Preordain, which is going to trigger Ledger Shredder and DRC.
I feel like Dan should be able to get to it.
Oh, absolutely. It'd be more impressive if he didn't. Not delirious yet. And discards a Stern Scolding, so we are delirious. And Ledger Shredder is getting a counter. And now the Preordain is resolving. Looks like
Yeah.
DRC land.
Yeah.
Both going to the bottom there. And drawing a Mishra's Bauble.
You can see a world where maybe you want to save the bauble to trigger Ledger Shredder next turn. But I don't know. It's kind of tough to turn down too because you get the surveil off the DRC. You can't trip the bauble away. You're looking at a decent amount of cards. So what are the odds that the Shredder's not going to be able to trigger next turn?
Yeah, it is a tough call. Definitely one to think about, which seems like Dan really is counting the cards in his graveyard.
Especially if you want to think about whether or not Patrick could have Bajuka Bog or Endurance or something to take out your graveyard. Bauble is one of the quickest cards to get your graveyard filled back up again.
Yeah, and looks like he is going to attack and then play Bauble second main. Surveilling off the DRC, leaving it on top. Not cracking the Bauble. And Patrick is going to dismember the Ledger Shredder on Dan's instep.
Pretty nice. Definitely the more threatening card. Especially with the graveyard hate that he potentially has access to. It's not that difficult to either eat the DRC outright with something like an Endurance in combat, or just keep it stuck in the 1/1 status.
And it looks like Patrick just plays a land and passes to Dan.
Double green open though.
Double green is open.
So Endurance is certainly a threat. If you played any amount with DRC, you know.
It's certainly the bane of DRC's existence.
I have you at 15, yeah.
Looks like we're gonna fetch out an island.
In general, the breach decks want to have like all blue and red duels in play if possible, because on their breach turns the mana can be so taxing and demanding. So this definitely indicates that Dan is either has like a moon effect or is trying to play for it.
Sure, and there is the Endurance from Patrick after the DRC swings in. Looks like Dan is letting it resolve, and in response to the ETB effect is going to Unholy Heat it. I think that was a Pick Your Poison he saw on top with the Surveil trigger. He's letting
Yeah.
it go to the yard.
And then he's going the bottom.
So
All of
River's
these are
still-
going to get shuffled up.
Yep. So DRC's still gonna get shrunk,
So I have 14.
but at least it's not gonna get directly eaten in combat, and you still have this thing around to help you surveil. And Dan has a preordain, which he wisely did not cast pre-combat, so now gets to get back to work and fill in the graveyard a little bit post-combat.
Yep, still sneaks in. Little point of damage. Gonna cast the Preordain, surveil off the DRC. Leaves it on top. Preordain resolves. There's a Blood Moon.
Yeah, very few cards I think I would keep on top in that situation. Blood Moon is one of them.
Blood Moon definitely one you want to see. It's like just a land in hand.
Doesn't draw that Blood Moon quite yet, though, because the other card was a Stern Scolding. So you get a little bit of protection this turn from a Dryad, perhaps.
Yeah, I really like that play from Dan. Looks like Patrick is going to play a bounce land, get back the Radiant Fountain. Radiant Fountain not going to do a lot if this Blood Moon sticks.
13.
It wasn't even trying to do a lot to begin with. just a couple life. Like, come
Well,
on,
it's
Blood
not
Moon.
going to do a little either.
Yeah. It just seems mean, you know?
Now, notably there, we could have had the Seiju bounce back to hand, but
Yeah.
certainly in this position, I mean, you're just kind of getting beat down by these creatures. Blood Moon is resolving, it seems. And we have two different card types in the yard.
So
And you saw Patrick thinking about what to pick up. And it was just
Mhm.
like, well, Dan's clock is still kind of anemic. Patrick has a dismember left if the DRC ever does become a 3/3 and you feel the need to kill it. And his deck does have plenty of ways to actually remove the Blood Moon, and it's kind of clear that Dan didn't have the Blood Moon quite yet, so
Yep.
tough decision for sure.
Tough decision. We're going to see an expressive iteration cast, triggering the DRC. Looks like he's leaving it on top again, and it is a dress down.
Also among those cards, backup Blood Moon if you potentially want that.
Mm-hmm. Now, Patrick has access to one basic forest so far. But another one could give access to a Titan.
And getting the second copy of Blood Moon is pretty good because Amulet doesn't have ways to mass remove enchantments or anything. So if Patrick couldn't kill the first one, the second one gives you a lot of additional insurance.
Yep, and still not quite delirious. So just getting in for a little things for one. I think that is a Bajuka Bog in Patrick's hand as well. I'm sure he would love to be able to get some value out of.
I'm okay with Blood Moon stopping that one for the record. Now with Artifact and Enchantment over the last couple turns, DRC is a 3/3. That's going to prompt a Dismember, so
Yep,
I think that makes sense.
yeah.
definitely would agree. And looks like we're just buying Gigantha. We've got the dress down mana up. And we're playing Gigantha.
5/5 time.
5/5 is quite a bit at the moment. Looks like Patrick just not drawing what he needs.
Not more colorless lands, but deck has what, 33 lands in it or something. It's a lot. 32.
Yeah. At 3 life, we know there is at least one bolt in the deck. And that's going to be game.
Yeah,
It's just
the
all
And
lands.
match for Dan.
Switch
Congratulations.
up
Double
seems
Blood
worse
Moon,
than the red,
hard
which
to
I think is
deal
the worst
with
copy
as a
matchup.
Titan player.
Yeah,
And that is our last round of the
it
Swiss,
felt like
Jerry.
he would.
Yeah, the good news for Patrick is the fact that he was already X1 and 1 playing down against an X and 3. I think Patrick is still good for top 8, so not that devastating. And
Yep.
in general, I think the Izzet decks are a decent matchup for him too. So he gets to have potentially a good matchup in top 8.
Yeah, and we do have a backup match for our final Swiss round here, which I think we are going to get down to very quickly. Very interested to see this one. We've got Rakdos Scam versus 5-color Creativity.
Or maybe not. This is saying Titan versus Gorios.
Maybe we have Titan versus Glorio. Well,
Well, let me pull up these deck lists then.
we're definitely looking at Titan versus Glorio based on this turn 1 play. Which turn 1 Amulet, definitely a nice start for the Titan player.
That is certainly where you want to be. Patrick did not have access to one all match, and deck certainly looked a little anemic compared to what we saw yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
It was a game where Patrick untapped, I think, all of 3 permanents while facing down an Emrakul the Aeon's Torn and just prompted the concession that turn. So Amulet does silly things.
It sure does. Alright, we are going to see Anthony, our Gorios player, getting a Surveil trigger here off this land. And keeping it on top, going to his turn.
Looking over these deck lists, it seems pretty standard from both players. Nothing too wild.
Yeah, nothing too wild. I mean, this is seems like a really nice start for Arthur here on the Titan deck. Getting this Dryad out. Amulet's already on the board. There's a Mycosynth.
Yeah, again though, it does seem to be just maybe missing a bounce land, or maybe has the bounce land in hand, is missing the big payoff card to cast.
Mm-hmm. But these are both decks that can kind of come out of nowhere. So interested to see how these shape up. We've already got an Atraxa in the yard for Anthony.
You know, Anthony doing a good job of trying to set up, putting big creature into the graveyard on turn 2 is generally where you want to be, because on turn 3, if you have a Glorious Vengeance, you can bring it back. Maybe Atraxa finds an Ephemerate, and then you blink it to draw even more cards and have her stick around permanently. I mentioned that Arthur, the Amulet player, might be missing the bounce land or the payoff. Looks like he was missing both.
Yeah, looks like a pretty strong start, but just not quite getting where you want to be.
Alright. I'll take an Ephemerate. I will take Traxa. I'll take Thoughtseize.
I mean, I think that's what you have to do with these decks like Amulet, because you need a certain amount of lands to cast your spells. You kind of want the Amulet, you want the bounce land, you want the big payoff card, and you can't necessarily just have a hand that has it all the time, and this had Amulet, Mycosynth Garden, and a Dryad, and you just kind of hope to get there from there. And sometimes
Yeah,
you
I
don't.
mean, there's no way you don't keep a hand like that. Now, things going quite nicely for Anthony getting to Gorios out this Atraxa, add a bunch of cards to his hand,
Ephemerate Atraxa.
attack, gain a bunch of life, ephemerate the Atraxa. I mean, this is what the deck wants to do, and it is devastating.
Yeah, kind of the funny thing though is that there are definitely moments where this is actually a little too small ball against things like Amulet. I think it's going to be good enough this game because Arthur doesn't have a ton going on,
Mm-hmm.
but you could certainly see situations where Arthur would very easily just be able to like put 3 Titans into play and attack through this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely two of the more powerful decks in the format that are able to, their power ceilings just feel extremely high.
Yeah, this is turn 3, and against so many decks in Modern, this is a virtual kill from the Gorios deck because you've just green lifed your opponent for 7, you griefed them also, and now you still have a full hand. Anthony's casting a Solitude too.
Yeah, that is tough. Getting rid of the Dryad there.
There are not many decks in the format that could beat stuff like this. Amulet just happens to be one of them.
Yeah. So gonna play Valakut for turns, gonna untap with the Amulet. Gonna play Grazer.
I'm not gonna pass this.
Gonna get another land in untapped. Grazer doing its job.
Block.
Thank you for your service. But Anthony's still gonna gain life off that attack.
Yeah, also chose to not go for pure value and ephemerate the Atraxa on upkeep, recognizing that like I actually have to close this game. It's not necessarily about just drawing a bunch of cards because it only really matters if your cards actually do things and actually help stop your opponent. But the 7-point life buffer you get from attacking might just be better than looking at 10 cards.
Yeah, and I mean, at a certain point, you gotta have already sculpted your hand, right?
What is that?
You
Oh,
would
Grover.
hope so, but I don't know. So sometimes the Gorios deck, you just end up drawing like a bunch of things that don't really matter all that much. You know, you put like more attractions into your hand, or just multiple copies of things like Faithful Mending, where you're just spinning your wheels and not really accomplishing a whole lot.
Yeah, and looks like we are, with 2 amulets, going to bounce land, float some mana, bounce area, get the Summoner's Pact, and get... What creature is that?
That's a primary Titan.
Oh, not familiar with the art, but yeah, that is a Titan, and Arthur's going to go ahead and grab a couple lands. Gonna give it haste, bounce with Seiju.
Combat. Otawara.
It's gonna get Otawara'd, which is good, but Arthur definitely not out of this.
Entirely. It's kind of interesting. It does depend what Anthony does have in hand. We saw him
Gorios, the creatures,
maybe intentionally miss a land drop in order to discard the Gristlebrand, and then just has the vengeance to finish it up.
Yep, and that is going to do it for game 1 here. Gonna go into game 2. Taking a look at these sideboards. Let's see, taking a look at Arthur's list here. What do you like to bring in against Gorios?
Graveyard hate. There is a Grafdigger's Cage and a Relic of Progenitus. Both of those are findable off of Urza Saga, so that's kind of nice. But not much past that. Doesn't look like there's a ton for this matchup, and the Bajuka Bog is already in the main deck. So You do have those 3 tutorable pieces of graveyard interaction. Notable that there's not an endurance or anything the summoners pack for, so maybe that cost Arthur at some point. I don't know, but the rest of the stuff: Dismember, Yasharn, Elish Norn, Curse Totem, Engineer Explosives, Drag Tusk. They're not really meant for this matchup.
Yeah, and it looks like we are ready to get into game 2 here. So we are watching players resolve mulligans. Anthony with quite the hand, it looks like, choosing what to put back. Looks like this might be a mull to 5. Looks like putting back a ephemerate and a solitude. Whereas
So keeping a 1-lander, but it is a surveil land, and there is a Tainted Indulgence also with an Atraxa to discard that, and then the Goryo's Vengeance and everything. So does kind of have what he needs.
yeah, and Arthur going to play Forest turn 1, Saga turn 2 into an Explorer Valakut.
So not a bad start. I wonder if the Saga was drawn on turn 2, or if that was a conscious choice to not play it on turn
I
1.
think he had it in his opening hand. Not sure why he chose to do it in this order, but I am sure he has a plan.
Yeah, I believe so too. I'm just curious what that is, considering how often the deck either wants to put Amulet into play as quickly as possible, or you might even want to get like the Relic or Grafdigger's Cage onto the battlefield. So, got something better in mind.
Yeah, gonna play a One Ring, which looks like Anthony is fetching a land in response.
So it does have a Force Negation that was in the opener and has Tainted Indulgence and Atraxa to potentially pitch, but you kind of want to cast one to discard the other.
Hmm.
And maybe Anthony is in a spot now where he knows that he needs to do that, and hopefully the Tainted Indulgence serves up a different blue card.
Yeah, hopefully. Let's see what he is going to get here. It is going to be a Tainted Indulgence.
I guess either way, you could cast this, and then if you don't find another blue card, you could potentially not discard the Atraxa, or at least like make the decision as to whether or not you want to do that.
Hmm.
Did discard the Atraxa, did not force the ring, so I'm guessing he did not find another blue card.
Sure, and it looks like tapping a couple mana going to Vengeance out the Atraxa. Here comes a look at 10 cards. After we fetch out this Plains.
Yeah, fetch first, then the deck a little bit. Uh, Math is not super great on that, but you might as well. You know you're gonna want a white source in play at the end of it, and maybe gets you like a little bit closer to finding the ephemerate, or maybe if wants to find a blue card to ensure that the force of negation is live or something. All makes sense.
Yep, we're gonna take a look here. Archaeologist, land, Atraxa, couple forces, another Atraxa, Thoughtseize, Grief.
So it looks like instant sorcery creature land. Nothing too spicy past that. So gonna get to draw 4 cards.
Yeah, I mean, pretty nice. Gonna ephemerate the Atraxa. And we're gonna do it again.
Yeah, no point in attacking because of the 1 ring protection.
Mm-hmm. And we've got a Solitude. Kind of a glare. I think that might be a Prismatic Ending.
Yep.
And then a Subtlety instead of the Solitude.
Yeah, subtlety's nice because I think that's a better answer to Primeval Titan than Solitude because it stops them from getting the actual ETB trigger.
Mm-hmm.
And you saw Griefs among those Atraxa piles, which Anthony did not select because there's not really a whole lot of reason to. When your opponent currently has protection from everything, you're not going to be able to do it this turn. So I like finding all of the stack-based interaction to ensure that Arthur can't do anything too powerful next turn.
Yeah, really puts him in a awkward spot against all this interaction. We are going to go to the cleanup step. Anthony's going to have many cards to discard.
Yeah, just drew 8. Not too bad to go from a mull to 5 to turn 3. I got to discard 6 cards.
Yeah, what a deck.
I'm still confused as to how Goryo's Vengeance has survived being legal for this many years.
As am I. Looks like we are discarding a Grief of Thoughtseize, a land, and I think that's the prismatic ending. And we're going to go back over to Arthur, who has a lot to deal with and a lot to play through.
Yeah, he knows that Anthony has at least subtlety, force, and negation.
Mm-hmm.
And at least, I guess, the Atraxa that Anthony picked up to pitch to one of them.
Yeah, he also knows about a Faithful Mending that was
Oh,
picked
yeah.
up, which
Yep.
can
So both of
be...
those are online.
Yeah. So Saga is going to trigger. We're going to get an Amulet. We're going to draw a couple with the ring.
Amulet is a start. I think in order to break through all of this free counter magic, he's going to have to present multiple threats this turn, which starts with trying to make multiple mana, right? So get
Yep,
the
we have
amulet,
two
copy the
amulets
garden.
now. Mm-hmm. We're going to play another garden. And there is the Grafdigger's Cage.
So not bad, but obviously a little late to the party.
A little late to the party.
Does have the garden to potentially make another Grafdigger's Cage too.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you kind of have to first deal with what's going on here. And Arthur knew that Anthony had a force of negation and plenty of blue cards and chose to not go after the cage. So maybe he just doesn't even care about it.
Yeah, and going back over to Anthony's turn, just going to attack in with the Atraxa, play a land, and pass. And we're going to make third Amulet. Give it up for Amulet number 3.
Do I have to?
I mean, kind of like what you were saying last game, this is the sort of deck that can actually like fight through this and come back from this. Very
In
interested to
theory.
see if Arthur's able to pull through. Gonna play a land, do the amulet thing a bunch of times.
So 6 mana floating and land drop used for turn.
Mm-hmm.
But I imagine there are going to be a few other ways to get some additional land drops. The One Ring has drawn 6 cards at this point. I would be shocked if there weren't some explorers and arboreal grazers waiting.
Yep. So we've got 3 green mana floating, 3 white mana floating.
And now we have our head in our hands. It's like, all right, we made 6 mana, but now what?
All right, I've got 10 cards and 6 mana. Gonna cast an Explore.
That's a start.
That is a start. It does resolve. Gonna play another bounce land.
Draws a card and gives you 4 mana. It's not bad.
Yep. Make 3 green and 3 blue. Bounce the bounce land. We have 10 mana floating.
And 2 still available from Arthur's lands too.
Mm-hmm. And attempt to cast a Dryad. Looks like Anthony has something to say about this one.
Could be hardcast solitude or hardcast subtlety.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if that's what we're about to see.
But then I wonder what Anthony would have left over to deal with Primeval Titan if it comes to that.
Yep.
The Dryad does add mana, but you're a few lands away from doing anything with that Valakut. So how threatening is this really?
Mm-hmm. So we are going to see a hard cast subtlety,
I mean, it does put lethal in play.
right? Arthur's going to put the Dryad back on top. And then we're going to see Cultivator Colossus.
I think the deck I've lost to the most in Modern in the last 6 months has been Amulet, and the vast majority of those have been because of the Cultivator Colossus.
It is a very sick card. So Arthur going to start discarding or putting lands onto the battlefield to draw cards.
Notably draws back up to that Dryad too.
Mm-hmm. And oh
Which
boy, what an amount of mana.
looks like 5 bounce land triggers. Yeah. Can pick up an Otawara, a Teleria West.
Yeah, uh, quite nice. I mean, as we said, the Titan deck can really turn on a dime like that, and extremely impressive to see it fight through that. I mean, not just an intimidating board state, but also the hand that Anthony had that Arthur knew about.
Yep.
I think very
Yeah.
well played from Arthur there to get through it.
Absolutely. Does make me wonder about the subtlety on the Dryad though, because I do think that was Anthony's best piece of permission to ensure that he didn't die that turn. And
Hmm.
not really sure how threatening that Dryad actually was.
Yeah, definitely, definitely a tough decision there. We are going to get to go to a game 3 here and see if Arthur can do it one more time or if Anthony will be the final victor we see in the Swiss of this tournament.
Amulet now on the draw. Gonna be a little bit tougher.
Yeah, definitely more difficult on the draw, and definitely uh, seems like Gorios really likes the play here.
Definitely does, and you saw Anthony just kind of like shrug off a Mold of 5 also.
Yeah, I mean, like you pointed out last game, went from mold to 5 to discard 4 cards on turn 3. Like, that is a huge card swing.
Yeah, and then also opted to not blink the Atraxa again on the next turn. It was just like, nah, I'm good. I've seen enough cards.
Yeah, looks like turn 1 for Anthony going to be a Surveil land, binning a land. We're going to see the turn 1 Saga from Arthur this time.
Had things gone the other way, and Anthony was able to pull that game 2 out, could have then thought back to like, was there anything Arthur could have done differently? And maybe the turn 1 Saga could have gotten Grafdigger's Cage onto the battlefield before Anthony was able to Goryo's Vengeance anything.
Mm-hmm.
But now that he's on the draw, that's still going to be a little bit too slow, at least if Anthony has everything all rolled up.
Yeah, and we are going to see from Anthony here a Grief pitching Atraxa, looking at quite a few scary cards from Arthur here. Got the ring, we've got the Dryad. Looks like we are getting rid of a Titan, getting rid of the ring.
And one of the Primeval Titans with the Ephemerate, and probably gonna try and get that last Primeval Titan with the Ephemerate rebound.
Probably. And we are going to go back over to Arthur here. Saga's going to tick up. And it's just going to be Otawara Pass.
Interesting. So Arthur's only other two lands were both bounce lands.
Hmm.
So him drawing the Otawara is actually pretty good because it means that he doesn't have to pick up the Saga this turn.
Right.
So now I could do something like put the Grafdigger's Cage into play next turn, or just the Amulet too. It might just be that, given that his hand is all like Explorers and Dryads.
Yeah, definitely going to be a big decision what he does with this Urza Saga. Looks like we are seeing another Ephemerate, getting rid of the Dryad. Arthur's hand now just lands and explore.
Yeah, during Arthur's draw step too, so that's kind of cool.
Very cool. All right, we're floating a mana, searching for an artifact. And it is going to be an amulet.
Yeah, at this point, Anthony doesn't have a big creature in the graveyard. Did pitch an Atraxa to the Grief already. Arthur's hand has been shredded a decent amount with multiple Grief triggers. And I think it does benefit him to try and get his game plan going rather than trying to slow Anthony down further with something like Grafdigger's Cage.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to see Arthur play his land, play an explore.
Yeah, so now it's two land drops remaining with two bounce lands potentially. So if he did spike a Primeval Titan or a Summoner's Pact off of that, could have just cast that.
Mm-hmm.
But it looked like he just kind of whiffed.
Yeah, not quite getting there, but we're going to go back to Anthony. He's going to get to attack in with this Grief, get some damage on the board.
And given that Arthur didn't seem to play anything despite having like 6 mana available, Anthony's just like, I don't need to blink this Grief. I don't think my opponent has anything. Let's just get this clock started.
Right, and gonna be a prismatic ending on the amulet, and then on Arthur's turn, we're gonna see the Dryad come into play. And bounce land to kick the Otawara back.
Well, that's solid. Arthur probably not in much danger of dying anytime soon if he wanted to hold on to the Otawara, but decides probably doesn't even need it.
Yep, just gonna go ahead and play it out. 5 mana available to him now.
So we did the plan B of the Goryo's deck, which is blink my Grief a bunch. Now are we
Mhm.
going to try and transition back to plan A?
Yeah, still nothing too exciting in the yard for Anthony, but at any time could get something there, especially with a card like Tainted Indulgence, which is going to discard the Grizzlebrand. We see Tainted Indulgence Grief as the cards in Anthony's hands.
So Tainted Indulgence still in the mode where Anthony would have to discard a card to it.
Right. He's gonna go ahead and cast it. Wow. Draws land, Goryo's Vengeance.
That's not
The
bad.
exact 2 cards. And with
It
the
always feels
Gristlebrand in
good.
the yard.
Feels good when that comes together. I've played a decent amount of Gorios, and there are plenty of spots you get into where it's like, oh, I'm going to play this card drawing spell, and I always am drawing live effectively to just hit like runner. And Anthony effectively did that. Was able to have nothing but the Tainted Indulgence. Played that, drew a thing to discard, also drew into another one. Used that to find a Goryo's Vengeance, and went from basically nothing to, again, probably going to have to go to cleanup step this turn.
Yeah, very powerful. But, I mean, you build your deck to do things like this.
No, exactly. This is what modern is. Love it or hate it. I kind of love it.
I kinda love it too.
Arthur re-enters the state where his head is in his hands. Worth noting though that Anthony has made all his land drops this turn. There's no Lotus Petals or Spirit Guides or anything like that. So this Gristlebrand is going to get exiled, but the ideal scenario would be for Anthony to find another Goryo's and a big creature to discard this turn, and then just be able to do that from here on out.
Well, and he's gonna get plenty of looks at it. Drawing 14 cards presently.
There is one Atraxa down and one Gristlebrand down, so there are 4 big things left. But I guess Anthony also has an Emrakul the Aeon's Torn that was sided in.
Yep. You see that there. We see Force and Negations. I'm not seeing a Subtlety, though, which is something that could punish him here. So he is gonna take another draw
Oh,
7 down to 2 life.
maybe kind of dangerous when your opponent does have 2 power in play, but does manage to find a Solitude.
Does manage to find a Solitude. Gonna go ahead and evoke that. Exile the Dryad. That makes you a bit safer. Gonna go ahead and
Do it again.
do it again.
Normally you want to,
Exile his own
yeah, normally you want to
Gristlebrand.
be ephemerating your Gristlebrand, but this works too, kind of.
Yep. Just make one of your draws free.
And also, you have 20 cards in your hand. You might as well use them. You know?
Yeah. Use them if you got them. And now can just sculpt exactly the hand that thinks he needs to close out the rest of this game.
Yeah, it has a Faithful Mending to discard the Emrakul next turn, and then with the shuffle trigger on the stack, he can Goryo's Vengeance it back. So definitely looking to keep those, and then just enough disruption to prevent Arthur from killing you on their turn, and that should be good enough.
Yep, we're gonna see the forces, we're gonna see the subtleties. Gonna keep a Gorios. And yeah, we're gonna keep the Emrakul, Attainted Indulgence. It's a tough position. Trying to think if there's any string of cards that Arthur could play that could get him out of this. Starting with a Pact, which looks like it is getting Force Negation. Gonna exile the Tainted Indulgence, so Force and Subtlety still both online.
Definitely great for Anthony. I guess that was the thing that he needed to discard the Emrakul, though. So that might not be available next turn.
Looks like we're doing a little transmuting of the Teleria. Getting another pact. Attacking it with the grief, taking
17,
Arthur down
attack
to
down
6, I
Because
believe.
I attacked with grief. I have attacked with grief, and then attack with Grizzle Brand. Okay.
Or 4.
Oh yeah, sorry. It's plus 2, so you're right.
It's like a little bit of a discussion about life totals among players. Okay, we are going to 6.
I feel like either way is going to be a 3-turn clock from this grief.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it doesn't matter all that much. Oh, this is interesting, though. Post-combat fetching a Surveil land. I think if you're going to do that, maybe you do it main A in case you hit and attracts it now.
Sure. Okay, gonna attempt to cast a Titan. It's gonna get subtletied. And that's gonna be game.
You can put it on top, but grief is going to attack you for 3, or I guess the subtlety is just lethal too.
Yeah, they're both the grief and the subtlety are gonna swing in and kill you exactly. So good game, and congratulations to Anthony here. In our final match of the Swiss. Jerry, I'm excited to get into top 8. Yeah, we're
Yeah,
gonna take
I
a
am too. All these decks look pretty good. We have some pretty normal stuff, but also some pretty wild stuff.
Yeah, for sure. We're gonna take a quick look at the bracket, I believe, and see sort of how things are standing. Here's what we have for your top 8 of this MXP Modern Tournament. And I mean, seeing a lot of the people that we have been uh, covering since yesterday here. We've got our Titan players, Yawgmoth, Breach, Scam. I mean, honestly, this top 8 list really, I think, makes Modern look really good. You know, like we're seeing a lot of variety in here.
I think you can maybe complain about grief scam stuff or primeval titan stuff or Gorios or whatever, but I mean, if everything is messed up, then nothing is messed up, you know? And all
Yeah,
of these players are effectively threatening like turn 3 kills outside of maybe the Azorius Mill deck.
right. But the Azorius Mill deck we have seen putting in work. I mean, that is our number 1 seed. And I mean, how impressive. How impressive to get there.
Yeah, Scott with an 11-1-1 record after the Swiss, 22-5 in games, just an incredible run.
Yeah, very, very incredible. Congratulations to all these players making it to the top 8. Just an absolute amazing showing. We're going to take a brief, just 2-minute break, and then we're going to get straight into the top 8. I can't wait, Jerry. Let's get into it.